Well, we had fun last weekend. 4th of July was a great day to celebrate America's independence. But then a whole bunch of other mess happened this past week. And I got to tell you, I'm shocked and dismayed at a lot of what has occurred this past week. But one of the good things that's happening today is our good friend David Morgan, the Silver Guru, author of The Morgan Report, is here in our studio. And we're delighted to have you here again, David. Welcome.
Well, thank you for having me.
So, listeners have commented on your resonant voice, David. And did you miss your calling? Should you have been a professional radio DJ or something?
Actually, I was a DJ in college for a brief time. Yes.
Oh. Yeah, I'm not surprised. Not surprised at all. Well, tell us a little bit about the Morgan Report and how people can get a copy of that.
Well, it's a financial newsletter. And I start from the top down analysis from what's going on in the macro economy, which means our global economy. We're all interconnected at this point. What's going on in the currency wars, which we're seeing throughout the Eurozone and, of course, the United States dollar. And the plain, simple truth of the matter that very few people grasp is that all fiat currencies have failed. And right now, if you go to the Federal Reserve Board and you look at what the 1913 dollar is worth, at that time it was 100 cents. Today it's worth about 3.5 cents. So we've lost about 97% of the purchasing power of the U.S. dollar over just more than 100 years. This is actually very, very upsetting for people to understand what I just said. So the Morgan Report is designed to help you not only preserve your wealth, but build your wealth during these trying times and come out the other side, because it's inevitable that there will be some type of reset. Most likely, there will not be a debt default. As Alan Greenspan has testified before he left the Fed, that there is no chance of a default because the government can print money to any quantity. So there won't be a default. But what they cannot guarantee is what the purchasing power of that currency will be.
And that was before they printed about $15 trillion.
Exactly. In fact, one of the things about finance and life in general is few people understand the power of the exponential curve. And we're on that in several areas, the monetary supply being one of them. But another one that a lot of people overlook is people in my generation don't realize that from 1964, 63, 64, from the time Kennedy was assassinated till now, the population of the world has doubled.
Wow.
That means that there's a lot more mouths to feed, there's a lot more cars to make, et cetera. So that's a stress on the overall system. And it also means that that we have, let's say, more difficulty keeping up with all of the growth that's required for everyone to, let's say, participate equally, which of course is a misnomer. There is no such thing. But the idea being that the limited resources and how they're distributed or how they are divided can be through several different systems. The one that seems to work the best, believe it or not, is free market capitalism. Although we haven't had that in a very, very long time, it might be nice to try it again.
Yes, that's an interesting comment, because so many people assume that what we now have is capitalism. They assume that what we now have is free market capitalism. And gosh, it hasn't been working, and so we need to replace it with socialism. And that will be the grand scheme of the coming years ahead. But you are absolutely correct, David, and we have shared this with our listeners many times. They need to return to what can be classified as Austrian economics, which is not debt-driven. It is a true free market economy. What we have now is kind of capitalism, but not really. It's what many have called crony capitalism. So give our listeners your take on what you believe this whole economic system is here in the United States. What really are we looking at? It certainly isn't free market capitalism. So what is it?
Well, it is a combination of a lot of different types of systems. I mean, government control over industry is called corporatism or fascism. And this is where the corporate state, the state comes in and helps a corporation. So we've seen that many times. You've seen when Lockheed had a problem, the government bailed them out. When General Motors had a problem. The government bailed them out. That is not free market capitalism.
Right.
The free market capitalism model is basically you have the right to succeed, but it also guarantees the right to fail. And the market determines who the winners and the losers are. So if there's 3 car companies as an example, and the marketplace determines that 2 of those 3 car companies are the best because they sell their automobiles at a profit, and the third one is a dog. People just don't want it, and they go out of business because they're unprofitable. The market has spoken, and that's how real free market capitalism works. It may be a poor analogy. I don't think it is, but it gives you the idea. So then you have the socialism, which basically the government controls most of the means of production, and they divide it equally among everyone. And in that case, you have systems, and it can vary to different degrees. That's kind of the hardcore case, and there's different angles on it. But one, for example, would be under FDR, the Social Security system. Basically, the idea is that you don't know how to save for your future. You're too stupid to do any planning on your own, so we will take care of you. Well, anytime someone gets in the middle of something, the person in the middle usually becomes the most profitable, and they are not as engaged as you would be if you had to strive for your own future. So it's something that the state set up in the 1930s, and everybody just accepts it. But really, if you stop to think for a minute or two, when you have a Social Security system, you're actually saying, hey, I'm a registered Social Security member and I'm a registered socialist, because that's actually what you're doing. But, try to get out of the system or try to not have a Social Security card is rather difficult. The point I'm making is that that's just taken for granted, and hardly anyone stops to think about, oh, geez, that's a socialist system. You have further ones that, of course, go on the more direct side, which would be more like communism, which a lot of the 10 planks of the Communist Manifesto are implemented into the United States system totally, which is one, for example, progressive income tax. That's straight out of a plank of the Communist Manifesto. So there's a lot going on with this idea of what, free market capitalism, or let's just say capitalism really is. The idea of pure capitalism exists very, very rarely in this country anymore. And it's a blend between communism, capitalism, fascism, and socialism.
Yeah, it's interesting. I was listening to a media person. He's a real liberal, but he was saying, well, they were talking about Venezuela, and he goes, yeah, socialism never works, but you have to have a balance between capitalism and socialism.
That's kind of what's been going on with the NWO, the New World Order. Basically, their idea, and I've studied this, is to blend them. In other words, let's take healthcare as an example. So everyone gets healthcare from the state, but yet if you have a business idea, you're free to go ahead and start that business idea as long as you do the correct, let's call it paperwork, corporate structure, tax situation, blessings by, the state, blessings by the city, blessings by, because there's lots of red tape in most of those type of legal structures. The point is that they think, they meaning the elites or the higher ups, that's a great system to have. You have a social safety net, so everyone's not fearful. And of course, if you have an entrepreneurial idea, you can proceed with it. However, the reality is that if you do have an entrepreneurial idea, believe me, you're going to end up paying a third party a great deal just for having a brilliant idea. In other words, you are not allowed to reap all of the benefits of your hard work. A great portion of that will be taken by the state right up front, just from the amount of work and requirements by the entities themselves, meaning the bureaucracy that's going to allow you to run with your idea. And then once it's running and doing really well, of course, they're going to come in and say, well, the profit that you have, part of that belongs to me. Well, why? You didn't help build the business. Well, yeah, but we set up the paperwork for you, and if you don't, business is going to last any longer. So,
well, let me jump in here because we also need to make a little profit here. So we're going to go to a quick break. Welcome back to Smart Wealth Radio, sponsored by Altmeyer Financial Group. I'm your host, Steve.
And I'm Dave, and this is the show where you're learning to be smart about the health of your wealth.
And for those of you listeners that are just now joining us, we have as our special guest today, David Morgan. author of the Morgan Report and well-known silver guru. And we're very interested in seeing what David has to say about the silver market. I have a hunch you're going to want to call in today. That number is 509-32-SMART. Again, that's 327-6278. So, David, welcome.
Thank you.
Good to have you on the program. And you have written a book that's called The Silver Manifesto. You wrote that with Chris Marchese. And man, that's quite the tome. That's got, a couple hundred pages in it, almost 250 pages, and lots of great information. David, what do you think's going to be happening in the future with silver and gold values?
Well, I think in paper terms, they're going to go far higher. If you value, let's say, silver or gold might be a better example, against another asset class, I think that's also very, very undervalued. For example, the Dow Jones Industrial Average versus gold. You can plot that, and you can see where at the top of the gold market, 1 ounce of gold usually buys the Dow Jones Industrial Average. At the bottom of the gold market, it takes 40 ounces of gold to buy the Dow Jones Industrial Average. Right now, we are very, very undervalued in gold, silver as well. And as this global economic empire continues to degrade and more uncertainty comes to the fore, people will be seeking value or assets that they can trust. Real estate's a prime example of a hard asset that people trust a great deal. The problem with real estate, in my view, is if you look at it as an investment, you have to look at it as you look at a bond. For a bond, you buy it for yield. So if you buy a bond for $100,000 and you want a good yield, and of course I know this does not exist today in the zero interest rate policy set up by the government, but if you go back into my youth in the 90s or so, you could get like a 10% yield on a bond. So $100,000 would yield about $10,000 a year. Real estate should be approached the same way. If you buy a house for $100,000, you ought to be able to rent it for, let's say, $1,000 a month and make $12,000 yield on your investment. That's not true hardly anywhere in most of the westernized world. It could be true in some cities, I understand that. But for the most part, real estate investors are not investing at all. They're not looking at a return on the investment. They're looking at rank speculation. They're buying it at a very high price, betting on the fact that the price will go even higher and somebody else will buy it from them. It has nothing to do with investing. It has to do with speculation, pure and simple. But you try to tell that to an avid real estate investor, and they'll look at you cross-eyed because they have such a strong belief system that real estate only goes up. Of course, most people now understand that's a false statement from the 2008 subprime mortgage crisis, which started the downward spiral that we're still in. We have never really recovered if you look at the data objectively.
That's right.
I look at real estate as a asset that just keeps up with inflation. If a person's renting a house out and inflation goes up, then they can charge higher rent. And so they get,
Yeah. I like real estate. And the key to making a profit on real estate is buying it at a low price. I mean, right?
With anything.
Well, that's true of anything, but especially with real estate because it's such a large purchase. In fact, for many people, most people, real estate is the largest purchase of their life. And, there's so many people out there, they go, well, why would you own 4 or 5 or 6 houses? I mean, you only need one, right? They just don't understand. It is a place to store wealth. And actually not a bad idea if somebody wants to create an income stream in retirement to buy a fully paid off, let's say, condominium. Let's say you put, $150,000 down on a condominium and you're going to earn, $1,000 a month, something like that. Well, if I did some quick figuring there, isn't that about a 7% yield? That's not so bad, right? I mean, that's better than probably what you could do in the market. Now, candidly, there's a lot of risk in that. And you have to be pretty careful to manage it correctly. And it's hard to buy just the right place and in just the right neighborhood. But Dave and I have some strategies where you don't have to take those kinds of risks. And you can get yields in the 6, 7, 8% range.
Well, the risk with real estate, there were a lot of developers that were out there, had a lot of loans to the bank, even in this area. And in 2008, the values went down. They couldn't sell them, move them, keep the bank going, and the bank got them back. And, over about 5-year period, they put so much out on, the market to try to keep the market up. But
yeah, the banks were careful not to put too much out there all at once, right? Because they didn't want to flood the market and
drive it down.
The law of supply and demand would have driven the price down for everybody. But, people want to get their house paid off. And I had an interesting conversation with a client this last week. He said, yeah, he owned 3 pieces of property and his personal residence, and he had one of his rental properties completely paid off, but he owed money on his primary residence. And I said, you know what? It probably would do you better if you flipped those 2 around and had your house, your home, your residence completely paid off and had debt on one of your rental units. And so we had an interesting conversation about that and why a person would do it in that way. But the reality is when you have money tied up in a property, it's pretty much in jail. It's really hard to get that money out. It is definitely not liquid. You can't just go down to the bank and say, well, gosh, I need, $50,000 to go invest in another piece of property. They don't necessarily just hand that money out that way.
I'd like to get back with David and see what he thinks of the Brexit and if that's going to have the unraveling of that and the effect of gold and silver on that.
And that's a great subject, and we do want to hear what David has to say about Brexit and what effect it has on gold and silver and other precious metals. But we do need to take another break. Doggone it. It just happens that way. And something quick for you to do to solve some of the big problems that have been facing you is to just give us a call. 509-32-SMART. That's 327-6278. You can set up a second opinion, wealth diagnosis. There's no cost or obligation for that. And Dave and I will be more than happy to have a conversation. We love meeting with radio listeners. They're awesome. So do give us a call, 509-327-6278, and we'll chat more with David Morgan right after these important announcements.
Does today's economic uncertainty have you nervous about retirement? Is the Wall Street roller coaster wearing you out? Altmeyer Financial Group can help you feel confident about having enough income at retirement while protecting your money. How? Give Dave or Steve a call, 509-32-SMART. That's 509-327-6278. No one knows for sure where our economy is headed, but Altmeyer Financial Group can give you the peace of mind knowing that your money is protected and delivering a sizable return. Altmeyer Financial Group, 509-327-6278.
Welcome back to Smart Wealth Radio, sponsored by Altmeyer Financial Group. I'm your host, Steve.
And I'm Dave, and this is the show where you're learning to be smart about the health of your wealth.
Be sure to call in 509-32-SMART. That's 327-6278 to learn more about the Morgan Report and about David Morgan's book, The Silver Manifesto, and to ask whatever questions you have about investing in gold or silver. We can certainly turn those questions over to David. Well, David, for those listeners just joining us, you are the silver guru. And Dave asked a question right before the break about your thoughts on Brexit and how that affects gold and silver.
Yeah, the unraveling of it.
Well, I think that the Brexit vote, I'm very aligned with. I think, I'm pro-freedom, less government, more of a true Republican with a small r, meaning that those that govern least govern best. We are adults and we can obey the rules. I mean, to get off and digress off onto a tangent slightly, I mean, everyone's screaming for more and more regulation. We have too many regulations. The problem is you cannot regulate honesty. I mean, that's what it boils down to. But coming back on point, the Brexit, well, I didn't think it would pass, to be honest, but it did, and I'm happy for the people that want their one less yoke around their neck. The European Union, of course, was the overseer of the UK government, and now that may exit. However, I want to be intellectually sincere, because Article 50 has to be implemented, and that could take up to 2 years. So just because the vote was counted and the people decided they wanted to exit the European Union doesn't mean it will actually take place. I don't want to be negative. I just want to be realistic. So a lot has to take place over the next several months to see what really happens. As far as gold and silver are concerned, it was very interesting. Gold started to move up on the idea that of the vote itself without anyone knowing the consequences. A great deal of gold traded hands into the vote. But silver actually just sat on the sidelines and did nothing. And so I decided to do a special article, an update for the general public. And I talked about the reason you didn't see much real buying into the silver market is there's a value added tax in almost all of Europe. In the United Kingdom, it is about 20%. So if you can buy gold with no VAT, no value-added tax, and you, if you want to buy silver, have to add 20% to your purchase price, it's a pretty easy decision to make. You're going to buy gold, not silver. There are ways to do it that are totally legal that allows you to buy in the UK without paying the VAT. And I wrote an article about that, and I did a video about that. It's on my YouTube channel. And I don't know if that had anything to do with it or not, but I was telling a recent interview about the silver market not confirming the gold move, and about a day after the words were out of my mouth, silver started to make a huge move and has moved substantially higher than gold on a year-over-year basis from the beginning of the year till now. Silver's actually outperformed gold quite substantially, and they're both moving up. So silver certainly has more volatility than gold. We all know that, but it did a great job, kind of late out of the gate, so to speak, but it certainly caught gold and passed it for a while. Right now, it seems the metals are going to cool off for a while, but I think a lot of people are questioning not only the governmental authorities that basically demand so much of the people, but also what are the alternatives they can do for a currency, because even though the United Kingdom was part of the Eurozone, they only had their own, they had their own currency. In other words, they're not part of the Euro system on a currency basis, which I thought was very interesting. I knew that from all my travels, and I thought it would be a lot easier for them to come out of the European Union than it would be for somebody like, say, in Germany or France that are on the Euro itself.
You know, I just read today where there's the possibility that they might not be on the world currency system.
Well, there's all kinds of stuff. I've actually, when I wrote this month's issue of the Morgan Report, I basically reviewed what the currency markets did across the globe, and then I did a couple brief paragraphs about the Brexit, and I was not going to write any more because there's so much information out there, and there's such extreme emotions surrounding this idea that I told my readers that I was just going to hold off. I was going to evaluate and come back to the topic later on. That's kind of my position right now, Dave.
Well, for our listeners, the Morgan Report's really easy to get to. You simply go to, amazingly enough, themorganreport.com. Boy, that was tough, wasn't it, David?
And I have a free Riches and Resources report for everybody. It's absolutely free. It's 11 pages long. I wrote every word. There is a film in there called the Four Horsemen film that talks about the age of empire, which is exactly where we are now on a global basis. And it's an hour and a half long, but it's a very educational film. You can just hit the hot link, watch it for free at your leisure on the weekend or at night, whatever suits you. And there's a lot of other good information about where we are in the global financial system and what you may consider to hedge basically the position that you have. I've never been everything gold and silver. That's not my character, and it's not necessary. Normally about a 10% position in the precious metals is sufficient for almost everyone.
David, I have to call you up on something. When you said back in the 90s when I was in my youth. now that was early in the program, but I kind of tucked that one away because
that'd be 26 years.
Yeah.
I would say 40. I felt young at 40. Yeah. I had all my hair, everything. I was good at 40. Look at Tom Cruise when I was 40.
Oh my. This last weekend, 4th of July weekend, I was reading a very interesting article about how young our founding fathers were. That in 1776, most of them were younger than 40 years old. and some quite younger than that.
Very interesting, and a shock to a lot of people. The way I think of it is that, there wasn't TV, there wasn't the internet, and most of these were intellectuals. These guys came from partly from the Enlightenment, or at least in that mode of thinking, and read a great deal and thought and had conversation. I mean, basically in those days, if you were an intellectual, what you did is you read, you went to the pub, and you discussed these really important, weighty matters. And this is the way that ideas progressed. And of course, also at the time, one of the best things that people would strive for is the ability in rhetoric, and the ability to stand up and speak your thoughts in a concise manner that would, let's say, draw a crowd around you.
Well, just a few of them here. In 1776, Andrew Jackson was 9 years old. Nathan Hale was 21. Alexander Hamilton was also 21. These were young folks. Betsy Ross was 24 years old. I mean, we think of her as an old lady, seamstress kind of a person. She was in her young 20s. Some other names that people would recognize would be Benedict Arnold, right? He was infamous in 1776 as the one that was a traitor, but he was 35 years old. And here he was, one of the commanders of one of the fleets. Very, very interesting that these people are so young, and you just wouldn't have thought about it.
It's before the liberal institutions brainwashed them, so they didn't use common sense anymore. Yeah, these people had common sense.
Yeah, and there were other people, that were older, but Samuel Adams was 53 years old, and Benjamin Franklin was actually 70. That was very, very old for that era, and very, very wise man. But nevertheless, most of them were pretty young. Well, ladies and gentlemen, the direction that our world is going, that our United States is going, is troubling. And if you are also feeling troubled about the way your retirement plans are going, you need to get some other input. And if you're going to improve anything, you have to change. So give Dave and me a call at 509-32-SMART. That's 327-6278. And we'll see if we can have a conversation that puts your ship back on the right route towards a happy and successful retirement plan. In the few seconds we have left, I wanted to make sure our listeners knew that this next week we have John Kamuta, the radio host, helping people to get out of debt. He has his own get out of debt system. And now John Kamuta is using a very unique strategy that I have a hunch you will be surprised at. We'll look forward to that next weekend, Saturday and Sunday at 8 o'clock sharp.
Bye-bye.
The information contained herein is not intended to be and shall not constitute an offer to sell nor the solicitation of any offer to buy any security. Content is provided for information purposes only and is not to be treated as advice to make any specific investment. Please consult with an independent investment advisor before making an investment decision.